Hello and welcome to Hidden from History. I'm your host, Kevin Annett, Eagle Strong Voice, with my co-host, Russ Latika. And it's great to have you all back this Saturday. And thanks especially to Nell Cole as well, our intrepid operator and supporter, and hopefully somebody who will also take part today. Not wanting to pressure you or anything now. Anyway, we're at www.hiddenfromhistory.org. Also, our book, Hidden No Longer, about genocide in Canada, can be found online now, hiddennolonger.com. And I wanted to very much welcome two very special guests today. John Brown from the Molested Catholics Group in Australia will be joining us first, followed later in the hour and a half by Peter Yellowquill, traditional chief from Manitoba, Long Plains Nation, of the Cree Nation in Canada, where Peter has been leading the battle to oppose the government whitewash of the genocide in Indian residential schools. So it's a great honor to have both of them on today. And I wanted to actually give you a couple of very encouraging updates that have happened. If you remember, first of all, over the waters in Ireland, some of the boys there who've been leading the campaign to hold the Catholic Church accountable and bring some kind of justice for survivors reported a while ago that they were actually threatened by the Director of Public Prosecutions in Ireland, that if they pressed to have a particularly notorious priest who's raped numerous children, if they pressed to have that man prosecuted, they themselves might face charges. If you can believe it, the government threatening people not to go after the church. Well, because of the exposure on this program and on other media, this last week, the Director of Public Prosecutions in Dublin has agreed to start investigating this priest. So it's a great victory for people there. It shows you that public exposure does bring pressure to bear on these government officials to start doing the right thing. So we want to congratulate Jerry and Dave and Kevin Flanagan and everybody over there who have bravely led this campaign. They've done a lot of public protests and everything to take on this collusion. So well done, everybody. Also, Gantanedo Horn, who was from the Mohawk Nation and who was on our show a little while ago, we've heard that the charges against her have been dropped. Apparently, the government is not going to pursue this bogus charge against her that she somehow assaulted 23 border guards when they, in fact, assaulted her 3 years ago, coming back into her own territory. And so that's another a good response that apparently we got from the show, and I'm sure that had a real impact. I also want to just in closing mention that I'm very happy to be going on Monday onto a fairly well listened to Aboriginal radio program in America. It's called Native America Calling. Apparently it has 5 million listeners. And myself and Peter Yellowquill and Jack McDonald and other people who were in our film Unrepentant talking about the residential schools, they're going to be coming on the air with me. Now, you can find this by going to their website, nativeamericacalling.com, and you'll see us right there on the Monday, January 24th program. It'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday. And if you wanted to call in, it's 1-800-996-2848. That's nativeamericacalling.com, Monday 10 a.m. on the West Coast, 1 p.m. on the East Coast. So please tune in and tell your friends about it. Russ, how are you?
Good. How are you today, Kevin?
I'm all pumped up as usual, you know.
Well, you were sounding pretty good the way you were speaking.
Well,
yeah, that's some pretty amazing news happening over in Ireland.
I'm so happy.
It had to take actual people to write letters and to get them to do their jobs. You know, at this point, if it's that easy, let's start calling for the resignations then.
Absolutely.
We can get action by writing letters, and let's start calling for resignations, and let's start getting action that way.
Right. And let's keep carrying on here because it shows our program is having an impact, and any of this kind of media is definitely reaching out there and moving people.
Well, if I could say a word, it's Bill.
Oh, hi.
Jerry and Dave probably are more aware of this than we are, but it also is mandatory that they keep up the pressure and make sure that these people are not just blowing hot air, you know, when they say they're going to start investigating this guy, that there should be an ongoing monitoring of just what they are doing.
Good point. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Bill. Yeah.
You don't trust them just to do what they say they're going to do because look at their track record.
Yeah.
You got to follow behind them and make sure it gets done. Absolutely.
Russ, would you like to introduce our guest, John Brown?
Well, we do have John Brown on the radio today with us. John Brown is from Australia. He was a survivor of the schools from 4 to 8 years old. He runs numerous websites, has come head-to-head, toe-to-toe with the Catholic Church and the Queensland Minister of Police. He has videos out. John Brown is a one-man crusade, it seems like, and this man will not stop until there is some sort of common sense justice to it all. He does produce T-shirts. We're going to talk to him about that today. So with that being said, let's get John on the radio and let's hear what John has to say.
Welcome, John.
How are you, Russ?
Welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for doing so, and it's great to have you, everybody together talking about this. Do you want to give a little bit of a background, maybe what you're engaged in now and how things are going for you and the campaign in Australia?
Okay. The campaign in Australia is effectively non-existent from my perspective. It's a very, very fractured campaign, and it's mostly split on belief lines. Do you believe in the Catholic Church, or do you believe that there's been abuse? It seems to be the main divider, and that's common throughout the survivor groups as well. My campaigning is an attempt to force our government to act responsibly, provide us the opportunity to live in a democratic society that we say we're prepared to live and fight and die for. And that means to me that any religion or any commercial entity that operates here operates under democratic principles. I'm also a keen advocate for justice and restoration to the survivors of sexual abuse at the hands of the Catholic Church. I strongly promote through those websites. One of those I push out very much is some statistics on the actual numbers. And they were taken from a woman in the United States who did some research and showed that I think it was 1.3 and 2.6% of males and females declared that they'd been sexually abused as children by Catholic clergy. When you extrapolate those numbers out, that gives us a number of 30 million alive today who have been sexually abused. That's enough for anybody to. Well,
of course, in rape cases, of course, only 10% of people ever report. So you got to, there's a lot of the unspoken, the people who won't come forward.
That's exactly right. So those numbers could quite easily be 300 million and still be realistic.
Yeah.
And, yes, I'm probably seen as the outspoken atheist. And I advocate for church systems to provide restoration to all survivors of clergy abuse, regardless of their belief.
Right.
And I might, if I can, Kevin, tell you just a brief little story. I spoke to my son yesterday, and I was able to do something for the first time in my life, explain a part of my life. And I found it so important in that healing aspect of life, to be able to explain what went on in your childhood and have somebody actually hear you and believe you. I'm 62 years of age, and that was an incredibly emotional thing for me yesterday, to hear that. And that came about, I had a foot jammed in the door of the car, and the car door was slammed repeatedly on my foot, on the lock of the door. And I walked with a limp and my foot twisted in for many, many years afterwards. The entire Catholic Church in the small town where I was, and this included nuns, priests, and everyday Catholics, spoke of my injury as being pigeon-toed, and they were all helpful in that regard. They did not allow anybody to speak of it as an injury occurred in association with rape by a Catholic clergy. That was the cover-up that I experienced as a child, and that's the cover-up many, many people experience today. That same ostracism and bullying that goes on is the actual cover-up, and that's, to my mind, keeps that part going. Because of that, I've encountered a number of legal responses from the church. One of those recently caused us to put up the XT3 Molested Catholics website, and that was simply done as a direct challenge to their legal threat. And if you have a look on the home page of that XT3 Molested Catholic site, you'll see that we've published immediately. We received this legal document from them. We published it on the internet in a number of locations.
What's that website for our listeners, John?
XT3molestedcatholics.com.
XT3 molestedcatholics.com. Okay.
And if you look at that website, you'll see that we've actually gone to xt3.com, which is the Catholic Church website, and we've taken all their web structure, their imaging, and we have reproduced it here and put our own content into it.
Great. How long has that been going,
That's
John?
quite a challenge. That one's been up a couple of months, 5 or 6 months, I think. We'll have a look back in October of 2010. Now, that's quite a challenge for the Catholic Church, because I know that I breach copyright and I breach a number of legalistic rules. However, the Catholic Church will not proceed against me, because if it does, it knows it will give us, me, as a representative of victims, a platform, an opportunity to get our voice into the public system. They will not go there. And the more survivors understand that the Catholic Church will not give you a public platform, they will shy away from you. And that gives you a lot of strength to be able to stand against them.
I was going to ask you, too, if you could give us kind of a little bit of a background about yourself, like, if as much of your story you're willing to talk about, and how you got into this activism,
Sure. I was a kid who was the sexual toy of nuns from around 4 years of age until I was violently raped by a priest at 8 years of age. And I became probably the Catholic Church's loudest critic in Australia. I was the kid that would stand in the main street and scream across the street to other people, and mostly Catholics in that town, about being sexually abused and about being raped by their priest.
Yeah.
And that didn't it taught me how to fight. And I was only a little bloke. But it split my family. I eventually left there, and I tried to fit into society, and I just was too loud and aggressive for most of them. So I spent the next 20 or so years driving tour coaches through the outback of Australia. I had a brief stint in Canada, and that I found very, very interesting. In both countries, I got to meet with Native American people, and here in Australia with Aboriginal people, and I spoke to them about the abuses that they'd received at the hands of religion, and it was horrible. The term genocide fits Australia's history equally. So I lived like that. Around 45, I found myself married with a newborn baby son, and the realization that I had married into a family who was related to the local bishop, and it was a nest of pedophiles and sexual abusers, and I found myself in the greatest fight of my life. And my one goal was that my son would never experience what I experienced. And I received direct threats by his grandmother that it was, and told by that family that it was their right to sexually abuse my son at any time they chose.
You are kidding. She said that.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Drop the magic four-letter F word into the middle of that. I spent 10 years knocking on the door of the local police station in an attempt to get something done about it. I attempted to take it through the courts. I educated my son that he would never be left alone with these people because they were a danger to him. I was surrounded by good Christian neighbours who came and visited me one day and told me that I wasn't being a good Christian because I was speaking out about being sexually abused at the hands of the Catholic Church, and their decision was that they would freeze me out of business, and they did. It cost me my home, my business, and my family. My son, when he was about a bit over 11 years of age, rang me one evening and said that he had to be alone with his grandmother for the first time on the following day, and he was afraid. That morning I went to his mother's place where he was meant to be and couldn't find him there, so I called police, and it turned into a rather incredible day, where at the end of the day they locked me into a mental institution involuntarily, and I was drugged forcibly on a daily basis for 3 months until I was informed by a fellow there that they would keep me there however long that I continued to talk about the sexual abuse by the Catholic Church and my experience with my family.
Shit.
I learned to shut up long enough to get out, and I was out for a day when I was given a tip that I was about to be arrested again. I left Toowoomba that day, or the middle of the night, and I learned lunchtime that day that there were 3 police cars with 6 police officers bursting into the place where I was meant to be. They were aiming to return me to the mental hospital. I stayed out of the city out of the state for a month until that order was gone, and I came back to rebuild my connection with my son, and I have a wonderful connection with him since then.
Good. What part of Australia are we talking about? John, sorry. What part of Australia for people? What area is this?
In Queensland. You would have seen Queensland. Toowoomba is the city that was just suffered major flash flooding here in Australia, so it may have been on your news over there.
It was, yeah.
It was, yeah.
Yes. I set out to journey through the Catholic churches towards healing process, and found that that was probably the core of the genocide training and education that the Catholic Church undertakes. It's probably one of the most horrific suicide-creating entities in this country, and they are personally responsible for the deaths of a number of people.
What is it that you're describing? What is this program?
The program is a program set up by the Catholic Church to, quote, compensate those who have been barred from access to proper legal justice. They have what's called an independent commission, and these are found right around the world. This is a commission set up and operated by the Catholic Church, paid for by the Catholic Church, and they're answerable only to the Catholic Church. They have a Queen's Counsel running it. He has the ability to flip between Catholic canon law and civil law at will. He does not represent the survivors in any way. The process is one of gathering knowledge and information about sexual abusers within the church so that they can remove them and keep them out of sight and protect them.
Yep.
It also goes on to offer people a small pittance and then ties them up with a confidentiality clause and attempts to silence them from there. It's the model that's been used around the world. It was established by George Pell here in Australia.
By who, sir?
There. George Pell, P-E-L-L. He's the Bishop of Australia.
My God.
Wow.
My
God.
John, it sounds like you stumbled over a major child trafficking network where you were living. I mean, and with the cops coming down and everything. Would you say that... I found it fairly difficult for a start to fight back against the local policing. I made contact with policemen here, and as you saw, I made contact with the Commissioner of Police. One of the things that I set out to do was to distribute more than 1 million emails within this country, and I did that legally. The law in Canada also supports exactly the same tactic. So I send out tens of thousands of emails, and I do that all legally because the law specifically exempts emails that are related to government or religion. And so I'm protected there. So I was able to, I'd attempted to get some assistance through the local press here, and of course they're a major spokesperson for the church here, so I didn't have much luck. And I came on 800 email addresses of local businesses, and I'd also had the email address of every police officer in Queensland. And I set out and I emailed them, and I told them that they were the greatest pox on the face of the planet, and I offered them the opportunity to take me to court for slander. I've never heard from them, and that was 18 months ago, and I do that sort of thing quite regularly. You mentioned what kind of support are you getting from the Ordinary Joe in Australia and other groups? I know there's a group about survivors of clergy abuse and that kind of thing.
I'm probably their world's worst enemy.
Really?
I've had dealings with 2 groups and in Australia, or 3, I suppose. Broken Rights is not effectively a group. They assist survivors through the processes of the Catholic Church. Then we have another who represents themselves as supporters of clergy sexual abuse, called In Good Faith and Associates. I provided them with web services and facilities, and when I got to asking questions about the safety of survivors, because the main thrust of their program was to rush people back into the embrace of the church. And once they're back there, no crime has been committed because everything has been forgiven. And you will find my communication with them on the Molested Catholics website from their solicitors, which I immediately published once again, and offered them the opportunity to take me to court as well, if their way of communicating was going to be a legal one. I haven't heard from them either. With the Survivors Australia, I have to put it this way. They brought to Australia recently a conference on sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, and I applaud them for that effort. It's absolutely fantastic to bring that here. The only area that I condemn them from is that, in my opinion, survivors of sexual abuse at the hands of Catholic clergy are eligible for support from all survivor groups, regardless of their current belief system.
Yep.
And that's my beef with those sort of programs.
Right.
They
Let me ask,
often few of them are inclusive.
Let me ask Russ or anybody else if they want to jump in with a question or anything.
Yeah,
John, this is Bill. Do you have any supporting network or organization, or are you acting solely on your own?
I work with a number of individuals. If that's the way, we don't work in or claim to belong to a group because we found that the group structures generally finish up lost in the argument of religion and the like. I work with people who consider that they have no better cause in their life than to defend and protect children.
Well done. Yeah.
Well done, yeah, absolutely. You know, when he was speaking, Kevin, and you said it sounds like the human networking thing that goes on, that's exactly what I was feeling. It felt to me when John was speaking that I felt that they simply were raping children and paying the prostitution fee for it later on in life, which again makes the sickness of what it is all about. You know, pennies on the dollars, and then these churches, as John and you on many occasions have set themselves up as a business to heal you after we rape you.
Yeah.
Don't want your healing after I'm raped.
They don't know what healing is. They don't know what healing is. Healing is a very, very different thing than being offered a religion that abuses you.
Right.
Or a check.
Yeah.
Or a check.
It's amazing how uniform the response is all over the world. The same crime, the same cover-up, the same people in charge, church, state, all one. It's why we've got to unite people all over the world on this.
They've never had the answer.
Very much.
You're right. That's why we have to unite.
2011 is the year that survivors across the world come together and demand from their governments that they bring a halt to these abuses and they restore the survivors and victims, provide them with justice.
John, well, in that regard, you know, I really want to urge you, in September we're holding a tribunal in London, and we're hoping to get video feeds from all over the world of people who want to talk about this. And your story would be fantastic to air at that in one of those forums, and so the whole world knows about this. So I hope to talk to you more about how we can do that.
That's great. I did receive an email with a mention of that, and one of the proudest days of my life to receive that sort of invitation.
Yes. Well, you're exactly the kind of fighter who is making, you know, in the future when children aren't suffering because of the work you've done. I mean, that's, and of course, the real reward we'll ever get, but that's the thing I think we have to keep looking to, you know, the children in the future and never take our eyes off them.
Yes. It's about the children.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have another question for John. John, here in the States, or actually here across Turtle Island, Canada, U.S., and, you know, there's mass graves of children that were forced into these schools. Do we have mass graves in Australia also?
I'm currently investigating. Yes, there are many, many children who didn't survive. I've currently released on the Molested Catholic websites almost 100 documents relating back to one particular orphanage. One of the stories there is boys being sent out after a flood, similar probably to what we just had, and their job was to pick up the bones of babies and children and rebury them because they'd been buried in unmarked graves across that property. It's called Near Coal, just near Rockhampton here in Queensland. It was an orphanage where 50% of the children died through different diseases. They were experimented on with experimental vaccines, even when they knew the vaccines were contaminated, and they coldly sat and described the way children died after being injected with these toxins, and continued on to so-called inoculate further children. When you've got somebody who coldly describes a young child foaming and frothing at the mouth and thrashing and then eventually dying, and they stood there and watched that sort of thing repeatedly. Many of those children were buried in unmarked graves. No death certificates were issued. The whole event was covered up.
It's the identical twin, then, absolutely.
That's a description.
The commonality.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a
commonality
description.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the commonality across the country and across the world. The same processes. It comes as part of being part of the education of the Catholic Church system.
It was a Roman Catholic orphanage, was it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. What was the name of the orphanage?
That was called Near Coal, Neerkol. It's one of many. We had laundries here as well, similar to Ireland. In Ireland, they found abuses of 30,000 children. Here in Australia, our government apologised for abuses against 500,000. But most of these people are tied up with confidentiality agreements with their own government.
Wow. Yep, same thing.
How was the apology accepted there by the people of Australia? You know, because in Canada, it was accepted by our national leaders. But you got to keep in mind, our national leaders in Native communities are not elected people; they're appointed.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the payroll chiefs, is what we call them, that accepted the apology. How was that apology accepted? Did people take it in, or did people take it like Bill says, it's a big F you?
People accepted it. People accepted it, and they wanted to accept it.
They wanted
as an indicator of change.
Yeah.
But they were simply words. We had politicians stand and weep, and they haven't passed legislation to follow on. They haven't removed statute of limitations so that legal recourse can be taken against the abusers. They've had investigations which have found criminal activities, and no action has been taken on those criminal activities. In regards that, we follow Canada very, very closely.
Right.
Yeah, they only seem to weep when they're backed up against the wall and have no choice but to apologize. Up to that point, they have absolutely no mercy, and even at that point, they're completely faking it. Because if they really cared, they'd set up something real and not this fake thing that they do to just buy the way out of jail.
Right. Well,
the fakeness of it is genuinely evident. We had one major apology here in Queensland from an inquiry called the Ford Inquiry, and that included ministers of government, and has a lie still going on over the shredding of documents and the like by government. But the apology was made by the government and 6, I think, or 5 of the church groups. And when you read it, it says, in effect, we're sorry, we did it, we're sorry, others were doing it, and if only the government gave us more money, we'd be able to do it some more.
Oh, my God. How do you even apologize for mass murder of children over a 100-year period and across the whole world?
Well, I think you would
do that.
I think it would be done with changing actions. But as we see, it's identical all the way around the circle on all different
template of mass murder.
Well, that's
not enough.
The real test is whether the church is going to be treated like any other group in society and tried and put on trial and face jail terms for murder. And the reality is they're not. They're getting away with mass murder, and John's showing us another example of how they do it.
Exactly.
I believe the cover-up and the actions of the cover-up, the way Catholic parishes or communities come together and they ostracize people out. I'm working with a mother. She's now a single mother, a battered woman, and she has 6 children, and in a small town in Victoria that's had 2 pedophile priests. One of her children was molested by the local priest, shown pornographic images, etc., and she has been effectively frozen out of the Catholic community and of any form of financial support from the Catholic system. She can obtain support provided she tells them that she believes in their polluted social system.
Right. That, John, the same thing happened here in Canada when the government, to a big fanfare announced the first Aboriginal Healing Fund in 1999. One of the conditions of receiving money is that you would agree never to sue the churches or the government. And that's what we're talking about. It's like this way that under the guise of healing, they're just concealing it and allowing it to continue.
Mm-hmm. You'll find, it's my belief, I've looked into some of that, and it's my belief that will not hold up in a court today. That if somebody challenges that, I believe that you will have that turned down, that need for secrecy. There's a number of laws that allow us to undertake certain steps to prevent the perversion of the course of justice, and that is a perversion of the course of justice. Yep. And therefore you are legally entitled to breach any restrictions that it purports to put before you.
That's right.
Is the judiciary in Australia independent, or is it still the colonial system that we have in Canada, where everything reverts to the Crown? Every lawyer is an officer of the Crown and therefore part of the system. I'm trying to get at whether you are better or worse off than we are.
I don't know too much about the Canadian legal system, but I can describe the Australian one. It's Christian from top to bottom, and that says that it's polluted by the same problems of the Catholic Church, because they've all originated from or followed the Catholic Church. To give you an example, I attempted to find an atheist lawyer or a Baptist lawyer. The reason why I looked for a Baptist lawyer, because if you want somebody to take on the Catholic Church, then find somebody who really has a fight or a hatred of them. I live in Toowoomba, and it's the Bible, it's the religious capital of Australia. We might have somewhere between 100 and 200 lawyers in this city, and after considerable work, I found that there were 2 non-Christians. Oh. And that representation is pretty standard across the board here in Australia.
And any of those lawyers...
The reason why I say that,
yeah, go ahead.
The reason I say that comes back from my experience of obtaining a psychiatric report for the Catholic Church, where I learned that if I wanted a good report, then I sought out an atheist or an agnostic psychiatrist, and I got a report that said that I was as sane and probably a little bit more so than the average bloke on the street. Yet if I went to a Christian psychiatrist, then I could have anything I chose to throw out, from multiple personalities to paranoid schizophrenia, danger to society. The simple reason is that if you speak against the Catholic Church and their belief to a Christian psychiatrist, he must find you insane.
Right.
If he doesn't
It's
find
a mental
you
illness.
insane, you must tell him. It must be a mental illness, because to do otherwise challenges his religious belief.
Incredible. I don't. You probably have a similar law on the books in Canada. Still, is blasphemous libel, where if you publicly criticize the doctrines of the Christian Church, you can go to jail for 2 years, and that's in the Criminal Code of Canada.
No, we had a wonderful little battle here. The church here wanted the ability to allow so-called good Christians to beat up on Muslims here in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So they removed the blasphemy law. And wonderful thing, they didn't realise that it also gave people the ability to speak against the Catholic Church as well.
Right.
It seems to me, this may be an accurate statement, maybe not, maybe you can correct me. It seems to me that your system in Australia is less dependent on the British colonial system than it is in Canada, but the power of the Catholic Church seems to be more prevalent in Australia than in Canada, where they are not they are sort of invisible to the extent that the other churches are, but the United Church, the Protestant churches, are every bit as culpable in all these areas as the Roman Catholic.
Yes. Yes. We're fairly blatant here. To give an example, we have states instead of provinces, and in the state of South Australia we have a Premier, and the Premier has as his right-hand man an unelected man by the name of Dean Capo. He's the 2IC of the Catholic Church in Australia, and he has free and open access to all things of government. He has free and open access to have direct input into policy making. He's an unelected official of the government of Australia. Our Constitution doesn't allow for it, but they do so. We have
sort of a Catholic Attorney General.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, 1997, there was a statement made by one of the leading Catholics in Australia when they had the three leading positions in Australia, from Prime Minister, Governor General, and Attorney General, were all Catholic. And they were quite proud of the fact that they'd had that degree of control in the country.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds a lot like Ireland.
We just have... Yes, Ireland differs in that much of the Catholic ethos was written into its constitution. We've been fortunate that we haven't had that here.
I got a question, John.
In there.
I got a question for you, John. I asked this to quite a few people. Why do you think it is that people like Bill, Kevin, Nell, myself, see through this, and we see what's going on, and we see the dangers, and we see the hatred that happens to children? Why is it that we see it, and we can take to the streets, but society itself does not take to the streets? Why do you feel that?
Because you have matured as a human being.
Just any normal, rational person
you become
I
a
speak
responsible human being because you understand the need to protect your children. When a society permits its children to be raped by a segment of itself and covers that up, that is the most dysfunctional thing any animal group on the planet can do. And we as human beings appear to be able to do that very, very efficiently. It's only those people who have matured and understand their obligation to their children and then their obligation to protect them from all things dangerous to them, that a person becomes mature enough and strong enough to look at the horrors that this stuff brings in the face.
Right. You should never sell your children to get your own identity and comfort in life.
My son was 3 minutes old when I held him, and I had thought about him coming into the world, and the first thing I ever spoke to him was that between you and I, always the truth.
Oh.
And I've held with that.
That's beautiful, John.
Yeah.
You know, John, I'd like to talk to you for the next couple of hours, but we have to leave a bit of time for Peter, and we have about 40 minutes left. It's an honor to be part of your struggle, and I will be talking to you by email. We'll have you on again. We want to find a way of working actively with you to support you.
And if I can make a humble suggestion, John, if there is a way, whatever organization you have, that you could be in London in September for the tribunal, I think that would be a marvelous event.
I want to be there.
Well, you're formally invited. And we could talk about that.
Yeah.
I've got 2 hands and 2 feet to hold up placards as well.
Absolutely. Well, brother, it's really good speaking to you. We'll talk to you really soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
John Brown, Australia. Great man.
A one-man crusade over there. He
yes.
Sounds a lot like you, Kevin. Sounds a lot like you.
Well, fortunately, it's not one of us anymore. It's more and more of us are getting on board, and it's because of the example of people like John. So I know he's an atheist, but I want to bless him anyway.
But he sounds like he has no organization whatever except himself.
Yep.
Yeah, I kind of liked what he said. He said, I don't get involved with organizations. I get involved with individual people who see that this is wrong. And that's
well,
right.
In one way, yes, but in another way, I don't know.
When he was talking about his children, Kevin, it brought me back to your story that it actually echoed your life from what I know of it. That's out there, the things that went through your life with you and your children, with your first wife and the divorce, and things that were perpetrated by the church themselves.
Yep.
You know, and I see the same thing happening in this man's life.